Okay, welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are returning, and welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. Welcome to this afternoon's Catapult Lockdown Virtual Salon. I will be in discussion with Rachel Chin, filmmaker from Jamaica. Before we begin, once again, I'd like to express thanks to the Catapult partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk for making these salons possible. Please feel free to ask questions in the comment section during the talk, and we'll get to those during the Q&A segment at the end of our conversation. Without further ado, welcome Rachel Chin.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm okay, I guess. Just very nervous. I really can't lie.
Well, I mean, let's start off right where with your most recent exercise, Trey Town. Tell me about the film and about your role in that project.
So Trey Town is a short film. It's currently in development because the short film is a proof of concept for a series that they're hoping to move into production. It's about a young up-and-coming politician in Jamaica who is trying to navigate, the very barbed social sphere that comes with campaigning for a seat, when she has a very personal secret. So I was a story editor for that. It was written by Latay Williams, and it's directed by Nadine Rollins, and I'm blanking on his name, which is really embarrassing. I'm gonna look it up, and I'm gonna.
But tell us for those of us who don't know, what is a story editor? What is your responsibility on a film project?
So a story editor is somebody who works in the development of the film, which is before they actually go into production. It's much like an editor in publishing, or I guess like news would. It's like when you have a writer that they're working on their project, they often have an amount of closeness to the work that makes it difficult for them to ask the sort of questions that they need to get it to function the way that they want. So it's my job to really figure out what it is that the writer is trying to accomplish, and what is the story that they're trying to tell, and to look within the script to see, where that has or has not happened just yet, and to talk to them about, the various ways in which they could approach this, like the kinds of issues that come up in the script that they have over the course of like various drafts. So I don't really give suggestions or recommendations. It's really breaking down to the core of the narrative. Like, what is it that this person is trying to say, and how best can I facilitate the story that they're trying to tell?
And is that, I mean, are you in conversation with the writer on at what stage does that conversation start? When they're just kind of forming the story and they have a treatment, or are you waiting for a first draft?
So I usually come in once there's a producer. So when they are planning to go into production, like officially, that's when you would speak to a story editor. And the idea is that you want the script to be the best at its the best stage that it can be before you actually start investing more time and more legs on the ground.
Sure.
Right. And so usually there's a finished draft that I would have to read through, and normally I would give coverage. Usually for short films, I would sort of break down like my first impressions and what I think it's done very well, and then start to ask a lot of the questions that I have reading it. Like, what is it that and these aren't really sort of like the good kind of questions, you know what I mean? Like this is like what is the implication of this? Like, sort of it's really more of why is this character doing this? Like, what is it that they are trying to accomplish, and what does that do for the story if that they act in this way in this instance, or in this instance they don't. Trying to, pull apart the narrative about as much as it can withstand it, with the understanding that there should be another draft for me to look at.
Well, I mean, it puts you, in some ways, in a very delicate position with a writer. Oftentimes when we talk about filmmaking, we talk about the writing phase as being like the most kind of intimate and precious phase, and everything else after that is kind of brutish and just a hard slog to the end, right? But that first action of writing the story is where one singular artist really gets to sit and pour themselves out. So what you are kind of the person who is the gatekeeper between that singular process and when this starts to move into a more active production phase. So what is that like? And when you're interacting with writers, I mean, how do you get them to kind of part ways with things that they may think are important in the story, but really don't drive the narrative?
That's like, the thing is, it's very, very delicate. You're right, because this is something that I haven't really been doing, I guess, for that long. It's been over a year now, but just the various people that I speak to, they're all artists in just very different ways. I think some people, that they think of themselves more as a director. Some people think of themselves more of a writer. And, the approach has to change based on the person, because it is, don't want to say, I don't want to demean the work therapists do, but it is, it's very psychological. So some people, they are very close to the work, not just in terms of perspective, but in just terms of emotional significance. And sometimes it's really sometimes it's walking through people, trying to get them to understand that you're asking all these questions in service of the narrative. It's not, it's not that you don't know what you're talking about. It's not that, you can't communicate an idea. It's just that you really need to crystallize, distill what the idea is, and how do you make that as apparent as you can to your audience? Because the thing about film is, I think, in many respects, it is just entirely a performance. I think, you have things like theater and dance, where you undertake it with the understanding that you have an audience. But the thing with film, especially when you have so many different
layers of
you have a lot of distance, from the actual audience. You might not actually ever, you're going to have different audiences. You might not actually have to be in the room with them. But I think for a lot of projects, they really do need a bit more consideration of the kind of conversation that you're trying to have
with audience in particular. Right. Yeah. Well, when we talked initially before this conversation, this thing that you wrote about in your statement to Catapult was really interesting to me. You said that that you've come to the understanding that filmmakers, particularly Jamaican filmmakers, are very concerned with cultural authenticity, right? Can you first of all, kind of give us an overview of what the media scene is like in Jamaica, and then in terms of the demographics and who are the practitioners, but also about what kind of characters you're seeing coming to the fore. What characters and what scenarios are filmmakers focusing on?
So this is this is a very broad overview, and I don't want to. You're gonna have to start with like some really broad strokes, I think, for this
Sure.
because it's really interesting for me coming back home, having been abroad for a few years, and being involved in the filmmaking scene, which before I left, I had really had no idea what it was or what it was like. I just did, as far as I knew it, there wasn't one.
Mm-hmm.
But then to come home and have people who are, industry professionals who've been working in a very like corporate or commercial setting for a long time, and they finally feel that they're in a position that they can move into more, personal storytelling, more
Yeah.
like, so they're people who are, they're, technically just like so adept. And then there are people who are, I think, I think this is like last year, Karamak they had established their film production major. So that's, very, very young student filmmakers who are, thinking about what it is to come up against people who, had to sort of figure their way out. And then you also have people who consider themselves Jamaican because of their heritage. Like they grew up abroad in like the UK or in the States, and they're very interested in reconnecting with the culture and the landscape in the films that they make. And and it is just really fascinating because like just like across, I guess, like all of that, you do have people who are very, I guess, like primarily concerned with what it is to be a Jamaican filmmaker and to make a Jamaican film. And
what do you, I mean, for you, as a Jamaican filmmaker yourself, I mean, do you feel like you can put your finger on what exactly that is?
No.
Can anyone? I mean, is anybody kind of like saying, well, these are the 10 identifiers of a Jamaican filmmaker or a Jamaican film?
So I think for me, like I just sort of, as a very personal aside, like I think I sort of made peace with the fact that I'm not, I think, what people think of when they think of a Jamaican person, like I don't know how to, I don't really know how to explain this without rambling. And I'm trying to be as relevant as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're
like I'm
deep
not,
in it. Yeah, this question
like
of, yeah.
they're just people are concerned. I think, people are concerned with different things in general, but I think Jamaicans are very, very proud to be Jamaican. And for me, it's just kind of like, it just happened. You know what I mean? Like I didn't try very hard to be born Jamaican. So I think I've kind of made peace with the fact that I don't have this sort of fire, you know what I mean, in that respect. And I will, I think honestly it has given me, it was like a weird kind of distance when I was growing up, but now I've just sort of made, like I said, I made peace with it. And it's really interesting seeing the way people think about the way that they carry themselves in the world. And I think for Caribbean artists, and as a region, it is something that it's inherited because you have to think of yourself as, like artists like asterisk. You're not like considered mainstream.
The prefix,
And you're constantly,
woman artist, black artist, gay art, whatever.
Yeah. You're constantly aware of what it is to be viewed by an outside culture, whether that's colonial or neo imperialistic. It's just what value do you have in your situation? You're like neglected, but you're like constantly surveilled. It's really it's really interesting because you understand what it means for these people to be able to tell their own stories. from their own perspective. But it really does inform so much of the work that they do that I don't think there's really really any separating it for, I think, a lot of the artists that I've spoken with and I've interacted with since I've joined the film scene here.
Well, I mean, that kind of introspective, I guess, complexity that you're talking about when you discover these moments of disconnect with the mainstream or with the popular culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially,
sorry, outside.
Oh, sorry. Especially, popular culture that is specifically designed for foreign consumption,
mm-hmm.
right? I think, coming from Barbados, when I went to Jamaica, my feeling was that, oh, I'm going to a more authentic culture because it didn't suffer under the weight of such a significant GDP percentage of tourism. Like, tourism didn't have that same level of impact, or so I thought. But after a couple of years, I realized that, even though it wasn't quite as prominent as it is in Barbados, there certainly was a very visible cultural construct for the purpose of foreign consumption. So for people who are, who experience the culture outside of that frame, do you see work coming out in Jamaica that has that kind of nuance, that is not necessarily feeding into a familiar mainstream audience, outsider audience?
I think I think I can think of a couple of short films that I've seen, and I still cannot remember the director's name, so this is like very embarrassing. It was like, what's the point? But I think it was in the UK, so they were filming the Jamaican community there. It's called Jerk, which is about, a man who had emigrated to London and he's dealing with depression, and there's, Traytown. I feel like I'm very biased because I worked on it, but that's the thing. It's just like I worked on it and I'd gone through the process with the writer, and
right.
It's for her. It's like a very complicated setup that she's trying to bring a lot of humanity to. It's not, sort of where it doesn't lean into, I think, a lot of the familiar assumptions that you would. I don't want to give it away, but it's also like they kind of give it away on the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival page. So the
right.
personal secret that she has, this politician, is that she's having an affair with a female reporter, and it's like we're not sort of like playing into like the sort of like very real homophobic despondency of the country. It's about like she's focusing on the personal strife of like having an affair with somebody that you have to keep secret for so many reasons. It's it's about the relationship of it. It's not just about the fact that Jamaica as an environment is homophobic, and that's the whole film. You know what I mean?
Right. To go through that process with the writer, was she, how receptive was she in your process of trying to bring that to the table, or was that already there?
So I'm gonna let's say Williams is really great. If you look her up, she's I think she has an article in the Gleaner about writing Traytown. Sure. She considers herself primarily a screenwriter, so she doesn't like a lot of people, they're like a writer director, but she's
right. She's a screenwriter,
and she's she's just so receptive to any amount of ways that she has to think about the story. Like not just like the social political implications of certain scenes or setups, but it's also or like more practical worries of like they had gotten funding for the short film, and it was under the understanding that they had to present it from the central character's point of view. And then we had drafts that had gone through, had like shifted perspectives, and they had brought various things to the like her understanding of the story that she was writing.
Mm-hmm.
But every time that you have to send back your notes, there's other things that are probably more material or metatextual or any number of things that you would talk her through. She would understand that she's learning something about her own work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was like, for me, it was like the first short film that I actually worked on as a story editor.
Right.
You don't want to. Can I don't know if I can curse, but you don't want to mess up. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, but she was like, I think she was just like, I still speak to her. She's great, but it's just like, she really understands that it's a process, and that there's no point in getting down on not being there just yet, because you don't know how many drafts it's going to take. But when you get there, it's because you got there.
Yeah. No, well, this brings me to a question about something else that you brought up in our first conversation. You talked about the research aspect of the film process, and that you said that as that there's an interesting dynamic between researcher and subject that affects the nature of the story. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how has that come up for you in your work? This dynamic between researcher and subject.
Okay, so I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, I think a lot of filmmakers, they're very concerned with being able to tell their own stories, because especially Jamaican and Caribbean artists, they understand what it is to be the object.
Mm-hmm.
They understand what it is to be looked at and to not really be engaged with in any where they have the sort of like dynamic of like an equal like power dynamic of like, I am a person and you're a person and we are both objects and subjects and interlocutor. And with that in mind, I think a lot of Jamaicans artists in general, because we're very political people in general, but people are very concerned with trying to accomplish something very important, not just for them, but for the culture. And, that does, I think, lead a lot of people to tackle subject matter that they don't really engage with. Because I'll say, like the film scene is, because film is expensive, film is very bourgeois here, because it's just, it costs a lot of money to be involved in film from every step of the way. Even if you're like just writing, yeah, you can sit down with like a computer screen, but then to like network, to like go out and meet people, and to like have the time to devote, like it's all a cost. And so when people, I think, try to delve into subject matter that they're not really, personally familiar with, it's just like, it's good to want to do that, and it's good to like, think about your characters as people, but it's just like, what else are you doing for the community that you're trying to represent? Because I think this is just something that has to be sort of like brought into a practice as a writer and a filmmaker, where it's just like, you really need to think about having a relationship with the people that you're trying to make your the subject of your film. Just like, who on your team is has that background, like what involvement do they have with the script, in what way can you credit them on the work. And I think for me, I mean, especially now with the pandemic, it's really difficult to get out and meet people, but for me, like, I know with that in mind, like, I just tended to be a lot more interior, like, focused, because, you know, I didn't feel that I was qualified to be really making any statement about something that I would not engage with in a, like, a material manner.
But it's interesting, you know, you said that, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, and certainly, especially in our part of the world, there's been a long tradition of the bourgeoisie feeling the responsibility of representing the working poor, right? So it's not necessarily a paradigm that is unique to filmmaking. I think it seems to be more illustrative of a larger complex, you know, that governs many different areas of society, you know. But in this case, I mean, we are talking about the researcher subject relationship as it relates to fiction, narrative fiction, not to documentary. You don't work in documentary. You don't really work in that area at all. So for narrative fiction, if not those characters, because that's the characters that, you know, those kind of character sets and scenarios are what feed the expectation of what Jamaican and Caribbean film should or could be. Do you see that starting to shift, that there are more stories that are perhaps more idiosyncratic or looking more interior into the character as opposed to exterior into their situation?
So actually, yeah, and the first film that comes to mind, I think everybody should know what I'm talking about. It's Flight by Kia Moses. It's like it's a short film. I think it come out 2 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago. And the thing, I mean, I cried the first time I watched it, but, you know, it's just like, the thing about it, it's a very, very touching story, because it's you understand what the character wants immediately, and you understand how that changes the way that they see the world around them. And, you know, it's a dynamic that you can take out of, I guess, like, the environment that the characters exist in. But I mean, I guess, like, for people who don't know, Flight is about a young boy trying to, in, like, the inner city of Kingston, who's dreaming of being an astronaut and getting to the moon. And, you know, this whole film is about him, you know, trying to make a spaceship. And the thing I really appreciate about Flight is just that when you're watching it and you understand the characters' economic situation, and you understand what feels possible for them because of the specificity of where they live and where they're from. But the film, like, they don't exist. The purpose of the characters is not to be poor. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's not a film.
And that is a really crucial difference, you know. You know, this idea of, what's the term you used? Grief pornography or something. I can't remember exactly what the term was you used when we spoke, but there is this real reliance about a kind of garish representation of poverty, right? That seems to be almost seductive in its intention, you know. It isn't, and it has permeated not just our images, but I think our lyrical sentiment as well, not just in Jamaica either, you know. And I think it is a crucial thing about dealing with poverty as either a subject matter or a context in film, is that if the characters are completely subsumed into that subject, then they cease to be human. And the very dehumanizing aspect of poverty that I think, you know, films that deal with that are trying to address, the films end up doing it themselves, you know, that the person becomes part of the backdrop as opposed to a living human being in a situation, and the situation is not the thing that defines them, right?
Yeah, I think kind of the thing is, I guess like the sentiment that I always kind of get from like it's very similar to like those films about starving children in Africa, and it's also there's just like this undercurrent of poor people can teach us so much about our humanity, and it's like, am I your intended audience? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's the thing that's always like I think is like a little bit concerning, is just watching these sort of things. It's just like I don't know what that means, that
Mhm.
this is, I'm watching this person go through, these things happen. I'm not saying that you can't depict them, but it's just like
From what
I
position does that filmmaker come to validate that perspective?
but it's not even just that, like validating that perspective. It's just that especially in the Caribbean context, because it is, we're so stratified as society, and it is so difficult to screen films in general. It's like, am I the intended audience, or is the like at what stage did you consider the kind of background that the character has, that's your intended audience? You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, I
And it,
think,
yeah.
with you not only work as a writer, you work as a you do design as well, correct? That
I
on these this one film that you shared, Poison Berry,
Oh, right. So
right?
yeah,
Your role on that was
I
you
was the
were
art director for that.
art director, right? So your intervention into the story space was a bit different. It was more visual in this case.
Yeah, so that was
Can
actually,
we just pull up those two Poison Berry images?
so yeah, that was actually a really great student film by Hannah Ann. I think she was the filmmaker, student filmmaker residence at
Hmm.
Barnard College in 2019. So it's on YouTube for anybody who wants to watch it. It's about this young girl. She is on her way to school in the morning. Her dog eats some fruit that she can't identify, and she spends the whole day worrying that he's going to die because of it. And so we get a lot of scenes about her sort of internal strife about and guilt about what she's done. But then it's sort of like very tragically, there's a school shooting at her while she is going throughout her day, and it's just put into perspective, I guess, like the things that you know worry kids have to worry about in the States.
So can you talk
Mhm.
about how you bring your acumen for narrative into this work? How do you develop art direction with story in mind?
So I mean, it's actually a really, really great learning process, because I mean, it's the first time I had something that I was art director on produced. But it's like the opposite side of the coin for being a story editor, where you are trying to establish the, I guess, like the narrative intent behind the story. But then when you're art director, it's like you are presented with a script, and you have to speak through the director what it is that the feeling that they're trying to visualize. And for this one in particular, because we have a real world and an imagined world, which is that's like primarily what I was focused on. Like there was there's like a World War I era hospital scene, and um, you know like I sort of, my influence is like a lot of like 80s music video, like Dog Funeral. And it's speaking with the director, and she's trying to really get into like the headscape of like a young girl who's very concerned with she's taking care of somebody, and with the guilt that she feels, and she's trying to, I guess, like cope with a lot of like these really large emotions. And it's just like, how do you visualize something like that? You know, she has it written in the screenplay that it's, you know, similar. This is it's similar to an old kind of film. So, you know, it's just like, what does the lighting look like if it's we're trying to get into a sense of concern and helplessness? Or
but do you feel like you have in that particular production, I mean, were you just kind of following the indicators in the script, or did you feel like you were bringing your own creative impulse into that that world?
I definitely felt, you know, that having the conversation alone, because at Hannah, she was like a really receptive, and, you know, like she's open to so many ideas, and but at the same time she's also very deliberate about, I think, the decisions that she makes. So when she hears something that makes sense, like she's like, we're gonna start developing that together. You know, it's a constant conversation.
Right. And I think this is one of the things I find so wonderful about working in film when it works well, is that it truly is a collaborative process. You know, like it really is about a group of artists sharing ideas, and out of that sharing comes this kind of unified vision of the world, or of the human psyche. So you function as a story editor, you function as an art director, but you've also directed and written as well, right?
Yeah. So when I
Let's maybe show a clip of your directing work. Should we show the side effects clip? No? Which one do you want?
We can. It's just like anything you show, I'm gonna be embarrassed.
All right, let's see. Maybe. Oh well, let's show once more with feeling. Let's show that clip. That's the first one, Philip. Number one. Hmm. And you wrote this piece as well, yeah?
Yeah. So I wrote this my sophomore year. This was my second year.
So I always, I kind of always feel like, the director, even though the director is, really responsible for everything, the real kind of, gut work of the director is to deal with actor performances, to really guide actors towards a level of emotional conviction that is going to make the film work. Can you talk to me about that? How you approach your actors?
Oh man, that was like a really great experience. I don't know if I did all that well as a director, but a lot of the school that I went to, a lot of the students there are like intimidatingly accomplished for a lot of reasons, and for in a lot of fields. And so a lot of people that I spoke to, they've already been experienced actors for how many years. But the thing is, it's at the same time they're students and they're very overworked and they have a lot of other things to think about. And it was really, it's not like I could really, it's a very verbose script, to be honest with you. And I couldn't ask them to rehearse because they just didn't have the time
Mm-hmm.
or like the headspace, and especially at the time of the semester that we had filmed it, like to really ask them to dedicate more time than they were already giving to me for free. And you know, even with that, it's just like you try and speak to them, you know, like just like before you go into a scene, it's just like, you know, what is it that you like, what is it that you got out of it when you're going through it, and what is it that, you know, you know, when I was writing this, what I heard or what I, you know, envisioned. And when we're going through it, it's just like, can we, like, just like on a practical matter, can we sound like we're not reading the script? You know what I mean?
But that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like, how do you get them from that place where they're just reciting lines to where they're delivering, you know, some level of credibility? Because you know, the girl in the bathroom in that scene does deliver, you know, I believe her. So how did you get her there?
Well, Indigo, she was just great. I mean, like from like we actually did like have to like cast for that role, and you know, I think from the outset, the way that she, you know, interpreted the lines that we gave her, it was like, you know, this is somebody who, you know, has like has the kind of intensity that you wanted, but also knew how to like halfway repress it, which is what the character needs.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also, you know, when you're on set, you kind of have to be very, I think for me, I have to be very specific about the language I use, about what it is that I want from, you know, because you can say anxious, but that doesn't, and you get an idea, you know what I mean? So maybe some actors I think are more, you know, very imaginative and they can latch on to that. But for some people, when they're, you know, they're looking to a director, they're looking for direction. So it's just like, it's not just anxiety, you know, it's just like, this is probably like the first panic attack that you're having for, you know, for the day, but you have these like every week, you know what I mean? Like, what is it exactly that you want them to consider for the character? And just be about, for me, I really just try and be about as specific as possible. And then at the same time, I think it's just like, it was just everybody on that team that I had, you know, asked a favor from. Like, they were just so professional and they were just so committed to the you know, the role that they had, that I think I really did luck out, honestly. Like, it's not really, and I think that's, for me, like that was like really gratifying, because I think that's the kind of director that I'd like to be, where you feel comfortable in letting people, you know, experiment and like think about.
Smart directors say 90% of their work is casting, right? If they cast well, then they're cool.
So, you know, like I really lucked out, I think, with the cast and the crew that I had. So
And this, do you want to show alternative vlogger? Can we talk about that?
we could show any clip that you want to show is fine.
All right, let's show that one. Can we show that one?
My videos with a bare face. So I've spent the past 2 or 3 hours. So I like to start all of my videos with a bare face. So I've spent the past 2 or 3 hours washing it with my tears. This is like really my holy grail, guys. Like, you can use them for anything. Generalized anxiety, stress, imposter syndrome, or just the crushing loneliness of the human condition. You know, I like to cover my face like 3 or 4 times a day. So, you know, you can use it for really anything.
All right, tell me about this one, Rachel. Where did this come from? What was your role on it? How did this play out?
This is its own narrative in itself. The school I went to, it's, you know, it's a very cutthroat environment. It's not very supportive, and my mother had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and I was very depressed. I was like insanely depressed, and it was very hard, I think, to operate in a lot of modes, you know, academically and creatively. And the thing is, you know, sometimes when you just sort of veg out in that state, you just watch a lot of YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually didn't, at this time, I didn't watch a lot of like beauty vlogs. But the thing is, like, I was very familiar with the format, and it's very consistent, you know, because it works. It's like a formula. Like people are trying to tap into like the sort of parasocial relationship that they have with their viewers.
Right.
And, you know, like this is something that is like, I the thing is like, it's supposed to be like a very soothing sort of media content to just like consume and learn from. And I think, you know, just a lot of the things that I was thinking about, the situation that I was in, the school that I went to, and just the fact that you still have to function in a lot of ways. That's what the whole video is actually about, where it's, you know, it's just like if you were so depressed that you had to just try and get people to not ask you about how badly, you know, that you're doing. But, you know, like that's the whole point, is just that this is your depression phase, basically. And so I wrote that script. I wasn't intended as a director. I was part of a sketch comedy. That's Columbia University. Well, low budget. It was no budget at the time. Sketch show. So like they would have like a rotation of directors. And the first director we had just like didn't understand the format at all. She was just like, this can't work. Nobody would watch this. And it's like,
wow.
YouTube videos are like 48 minutes long of just people's faces. You know, it's a big thing, and people tune into it. And if you don't,
you don't get it. You don't get it. And if you don't adhere to the format, the joke is kind of lost, because it's just like it doesn't play
outside. It doesn't exist outside of this setting. And so I mean, like it was like a really like the club itself at the time was, you know, they were very protective, I think, of everyone's creative vision, where they said like, look, you know, like if it is just so incompatible with what it is that you're trying to say as a writer, maybe we should just, you know, just put it aside for a while and then
wait for another director.
So yeah, but eventually they had asked me to direct it.
So you wrote it and directed it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, Rachel, I want to give the viewers a chance to talk to you. So and we're all heading towards our hour mark. So if we could have the first question, Philip. Okay. Have you had the opportunity to connect with a regional filmmaking community? And is growing that community something you're interested in?
So actually, very recently, I got in contact with ISLE, as in ISLE, and Indies. So they're like a up and coming film marketing startup, and they're very invested in connecting Caribbean audiences to Caribbean film, because it's actually very difficult to stream a lot of the things that come out of the Caribbean. Like, you know, just for example, the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival was, you know, is only available for the English-speaking Caribbean.
Right.
And so, you know, people like in Toronto, for a lot of reasons, you know, it's just like practical issues, but you can understand that it's very hard to find a lot of the work that people do. So the person that I was first in contact with was Rachel Osborne. She's based in Toronto, and you know, in like the brief period of time that I've been speaking with them, I've been in touch with people from like Guadeloupe, and you know, I think like just like, you know, like what is the things that they're thinking about and the issues. It's been like very
in terms of distribution and kind of production models.
Yeah, like it's really like everyone's like has a very similar concerns. You know, like the specifics of it, you know, are different from country to country. But it's just like the issues, like most people, they can't connect with the work that they'd like to, and that they are trying in their own like sort of like piecemeal ways to get in touch or like to bring the audience together. So it's happening very slowly, I think, is to answer the question properly.
Okay, I think we have it. Here we are. Rachel, are there other young Jamaican filmmakers with whom you are having conversations as a way to build bridges into the Jamaican film community?
So it's like, I guess, like build bridges within the film community.
Mm-hmm. So I think well, you talk a
Mhm.
lot about your networking experience and how important that is. Are there are there people like in your age group that are kind of on the come up in the scene that you're connecting with?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, like, there's Late, like I had mentioned. I think she's only a couple years older than I am, and then there's somebody I actually went to
This is
high school.
the writer from Trezon.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then there's he's actually my friend from high school. So, but Hanif James, and then there's Caleb. I don't want to butcher his name, but it's Caleb Daguilar. I think he's doing his master's at Goldsmiths.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like on an individual basis. Yes, it's very difficult, I think, to answer some of these questions because I haven't been back home all that long, and most of it has been under pandemic
Right.
circumstances. But I have to really credit JAFTA, I think, for a lot of the work that they do because they're so invested in fomenting a community amongst practicing professionals.
Right.
And even if you consider yourself like an emerging filmmaker, they're really consistent about trying to provide opportunities for people to really think about from different angles. And like, I really pray for the day that I'll be able to see people from there again in person. But I think a lot of the initiatives that they have, that's already, I think, it's just like it's the like the results are there. You know what I mean? Like JAFTA is just
Mhm.
like they're really
They're doing
serious.
what is their
They,
work.
yeah, like they're
Yeah.
serious about it, and it's very heartening that they want to support filmmaking, and they really put their money where their mouth is.
Good
They're
stuff.
just great.
All right. The next question. All right. At this emerging point in your career, having delved into writing, directing, and art direction, is there one area you gravitate to most, or are you keen on continuing to explore all?
I just, like, again, pandemic conditions. I've been doing a lot of writing, but I miss directing so much. So I think, and I think about long term, I would be like a writer director, hopefully,
Right.
But I do also really appreciate art direction. I think that, like, that experience of just being a support member. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think, like, when I function in a mode as a writer director, you can get very like, this is my vision, this is my work, and sometimes you just want to work in service of
Mhm.
someone else's vision, and
Right.
that is, it is just, I love it, I really do. So I really don't think at this point in time, or even in the near future, that I would choose between any of
One or
them.
the other. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think this is our last question. Hi, Rachel. You alluded to the high cost of film in Jamaica. Would you say there is currently a high demand for persons in the field there?
Um, yeah, I think there's definitely more than I think a lot of people outside of the creative industry really understand. There's a lot of positions that go into filmmaking, whether it's, on just like a narrative basis, a documentary basis, a commercial, corporate. There's a lot of there are a lot of positions, and it's not just like production or development. There's marketing, there's distribution, there's
Mhm.
publicity. And these are a lot of aspects of the film industry that have kind of not been addressed, like in a serious capacity.
Like the back end stuff,
Yeah, it's not just
production.
being on set and working with actors. It's also reaching your audience, you know, navigating, you know, engagement and markets and festivals. And there, you know, in most like established industries, you have people who are, that's their job function is dedicated to that, and we just don't really have them here yet.
Well, I you know, every time I hear someone use the term film industry for what's going on in the region right now, I'm a little apprehensive to concede that, because for that very reason, is that we just simply don't have an industrial structure that warrants naming it as such. You know, we're perhaps, as a friend of mine says, we're a sector, but not an industry. But it sounds like what JAFTA is doing, and what the scene is evolving into, there's a real recognition that, you know, the kind of less glamorous aspects or less creative aspects of the filmmaking practice are starting to be considered as equally important.
Right.
That's great news. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to meet you. And I'm very much looking forward to your next steps. What's next on the horizon for you? What's your kind of next?
So I have a short film that I wanted to film, but then restrictions rose again, so it didn't seem very safe to have so many people in like
For sure.
small settings. So I have another one that I've written, and I'm starting to look to get funding. Actually, it's like a big. I was hoping for the first one to be like a skeleton budget, skeleton crew, like I'm used to.
Right.
But I think I should actually try a budget. So yeah, hopefully that something will happen.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us. In closing today's salon, I'd like to once again thank the Catapult partners, the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk. And also, please remember to join us for the next Catapult Lockdown Virtual Salon at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, the 13th of October, with Dr. Marsha Pierce, who will be in dialogue with Jenna Lindo and Esther
Gina Lindo.
Gina
Gina.
Lindo. Apologies. And Esther Chen. Thanks a lot, everybody. Remember also that all of these conversations are being archived on Fresh Milk's YouTube channel and are available immediately upon completion. Take care, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe.